Hey guys, Matt here from Laidlaw Harley-Davidson. So today we're going to be talking about the 2025 model year Breakout.
So first, let's talk about a few of the differences between the 24 and 25. Outside of the aesthetic differences, which there are quite a few, it would probably be a long video if we went over every little thing that was different between the two bikes. I think the biggest difference is going to be the actual feel of the motorcycle. So one thing I like is that it's still a Breakout, and it feels very much like a Breakout, and I think that's a good thing for Breakout owners. The biggest difference that I noticed is with how responsive the throttle is. So having the ride modes, I think, is a very exciting thing to see in this new platform. So the Softail chassis, we haven't seen the ride modes yet. If you've seen Matt's previous video, it talks about the electrical architecture that has changed over in these. So that is a really nice thing to have. Ride modes kind of gives you that variety in differences in mood. Some of the fun of having multiple bikes is that they kind of scratch a different itch, and it does that a little bit with the different ride modes. So if you are caught in inclement weather, you do have the rain mode, which is going to dampen your throttle response, increase the intervention of your safety features. And speaking of safety features, they did add more features to the suite of electronics when it comes to traction control. So in the 24 model year, we had a pretty rudimentary suite of traction control features. Now they've added the 6-axis IMU, which we've previously only seen in the touring chassis bikes, and they're now in here. So the biggest difference between the Softail chassis, what that traction control comes with, and the bagger chassis is there's only a couple features that are still unique to the touring chassis. So the Softail chassis doesn't have the hill assist, which personally I really like the hill assist. I use it quite a bit. And then it also doesn't have linked braking. So the linked braking is, I believe that's not a Harley thing, that's a Brembo thing. So those being on the touring bikes with Brembo brakes, you do have electronically linked braking on the baggers that you do not have on this. Pretty much everything else that comes with the traction control system is now on the Softail chassis. So if you are a safety-minded guy, if you're a techie guy like me, I like that kind of stuff. I like having it. I think it's a great addition to this platform.
We had a lot of changes in the 25 model year in the Softail family. Things like a new electrical architecture on these bikes, which gave us a lot of little upgrades, is really the best way I can describe the Softails this year. They just made a lot of little tweaks in a lot of different areas to make the bike just overall significantly better. Things like your ride modes, things like LED lighting all the way around. Prior to this model year, you had halogen bulbs in the 2 turn signals, which are important because these are your brake lights as well. So we got LED all the way around. With the new wiring harness and everything, you've got things like new switch housings to accommodate for ride mode. All the Softails, including the Breakout, have cruise control. Breakouts had cruise control in past years though. In the 24 model year, which is the bike I have behind me, I'm going to be going over some of the differences here. Some of the finishes on the triple trees and things like that have been changed. This went for more of a chromed out, less black, more chrome on this model year bike. Gauge has been changed. Before you had the small LCD screen. Now you have an analog tach for your speedometer. You have your RPM in a small little LCD screen here on the bottom. But really guys, the rider looking for a Breakout is pretty much the same this year as it has been always. It's for that guy that wants a bare bones, just raw ripper from the factory. You got a big 21-inch wheel in the front, roulette style wheels, a big 240mm rear tire. This is among the biggest, fattest tires you can get from the factory. The other bike that has this size of a rear tire is the Fat Boy. And so you have that 34-degree rake in the front as well. So of all the Softails, this has a more pronounced rake in the front end more than any other Softail. So you combine that with the wheel and you have again that kind of that chopper-esque motorcycle look.
Some of the other differences are mostly from the powertrain. So you do see and feel the difference. As you can see, the air cleaners are a little bit different, but it's essentially the same motor. It's the same 117 from the 24 to the 25, specifically on the Breakout. So you don't see a whole big jump in power, but there is the butt dyno, and it does feel snappier, it feels zippier, especially when you're in sport mode. So I enjoy flipping through the modes. When we do these little rides, we're not going terribly far, we're only going a few miles, but I'm flipping through them constantly just to see what kind of difference I can feel on it, and it is significant. So if you're going from rain and you just click over twice to sport mode, you can definitely feel the difference in the motor and the power delivery as you're sitting on the bike. I think the Breakout is a unique bike and has a unique customer. So there's some guys, and it's really fun to see when they walk in and maybe they don't know too much about different Harley models, or you know, the last bike they had was an Evo from the 90s or something like that, and they walk in and they see the Breakout and they're like, what is that? And I think a lot of them think it's not a factory bike, and that's one of the most beautiful things about a Breakout, is that it does look like a custom bike. So I think this bike is for those guys. This is the vision of what they imagine when they think of a big, heavy American cruiser. In that sense, if you're a Breakout customer, you already know you're a Breakout guy, and pretty much you're just looking at, okay, well, what features do the 25 have that differentiate it from the model years before? I really do like the engine features. I like the ride modes. Some of the other changes are mostly aesthetic changes. I think if I'm just looking at the bike, I'm not a huge fan of the gauge. I think it looked a lot cleaner on the 24 being that small gauge, but as a rider, when I'm sitting on the bike and I do look down at the gauge, I much prefer looking at this gauge. I think there's a lot more data and it's a lot more natural for what I'm used to, and when I look down at it, I understand everything that's going on with it. I don't feel the need to click through some of the toggle features on it. When it comes to the hand controls, aesthetically, when I look at them, it's kind of similar to the Speedo. When I look at them, I'm not a huge fan. I think they look a little bit big. There's a little bit of negative space up on top, but functionality wise and ergonomically, I really like it. I love this trigger switch for the brights. I think it's way more user-friendly than the buttons that we have from the past. I did get used to the rocker switches, so going from the modes, rather than reaching all the way over, I was actually pulling my thumb this way against the turn signal to click the mode over. It made it a little bit easier to reach on there. Aesthetically, not my favorite. Functionality-wise, sitting on the bike, operating the bike, and clicking the buttons, absolutely love it. Essentially, we have the same chassis, we have the same setup, new paint graphics on the tank, which is really nice. I like the way they did that this year. They did change the headlight, so all the way up until the 24 model year, they had what kind of resembles the Livewire headlight. So now they've gone to this 5.75 inch, which is a little bit more traditional looking for a Harley FX front end, but I think it looks really good. If I were designing this, I probably would have made some sort of eyebrow from the days of old and had it as a top mount, because I like that eyebrow mount, and it kind of hides the wiring underneath the top triple tree clamp, and so you can't see the bolts from your risers. But other than that, I'm not mad at the other changes that they made, like the triple tree clamps are now in, I guess they're brushed or they're chrome instead of being black. That doesn't bother me too much. It looks like the rectifier is a little bit different.
Now the Breakout we've had on and off now since the 2013 year. So the Breakout has kind of filled that role of like your factory custom chopper-esque looking motorcycle. Harley-Davidson tried to do that back in the day with the rocker. Rocker didn't really last very long, didn't really catch on, but the Breakout has been a big hit since the 2013 model year. We saw a little bit of a break between, I think it was like the 20 to 23 model year in North America, and then in 2023, Harley-Davidson brought it back with some nice changes, 5-gallon tank, 117 powertrain, and the bike has just been a grand slam ever since. I've ridden the Breakout many times over the years, but it's always nice to jump on the bike and ride the 24 and the 25 back to back. This year they did change the suspension. They went to a straight rate spring on all the Softails this year as opposed to a progressive rate spring. And where that's going to help you out the most, and I did kind of feel this, is over the real harsh stuff in the road. So dips and bumps, things like the freeway joints, real harsh bumps, especially at speed. A straight rate spring is going to do a little bit better on that. Now the smaller stuff, just like small little bumps in the road and things like that, I think maybe the progressive is going to do a little bit better, but there's a science behind that and there's a preference behind that as well. They did get rid of the adjuster, the quick adjustment on the preload this year, so you used to have that knob on prior model years. They did get rid of that, so you'll need to take the seat off and adjust the preload there. The handling is one that's a little bit unique to the Breakout and the Fat Boy for that matter. You've got kind of these large wheels and tires on this bike that look awesome, and they deliver an amazing custom look. But if you're riding on a racetrack, probably not your first choice in wheel and tire size, right? One thing I will say is we talk about this every year, and it takes a little bit more body English to put this into a turn, and it rolls into the turn a little bit slower than the other bikes. But for a chopper-esque motorcycle that delivers this style, it still handles very, very well. I don't think anybody has ever bought this bike and felt like, oh wow, this thing is just very difficult to ride. Harley-Davidson Motor Company wouldn't put it out if you were severely compromised in your handling. So today's ride reminded me of that once again. And just going down the road, you have just this really cool uninhibited views of that rear tire there. Looks really, really good. Something I noticed right away as well is you have the custom version of the Milwaukee-Eight 117. So we have 3 different versions of this 117 that's in all of the Softails this model year. So in addition to the center cooled heads that you have this year, a little bit more efficient cooling with the way that the oil is piped around the heads. By the way, you still have the same footprint on the oil cooler this year, so nothing larger in terms of cooling in the front, which is nice, retain that clean styling and look. But you do have a more efficient cooling system with the center cooling. This has kind of the mid-tier of the 3 different versions of the Milwaukee-Eight, so they call this the custom classification. So this and the Fat Boy have the custom. There's the classic on the Heritage and the Street Bob, custom on the Breakout and the Fat Boy, and then you have the high output 117 on the Lowrider S and Lowrider ST. I put this in sport mode. Definitely more power and responsiveness than the old 24 model year Breakout. Not that that's a slow bike by any means, but you do feel like this has a little bit more get up and go.
The suspension is another thing that they did update. So you don't have that adjustable knob on the right side of the bike, which personally I was never really a fan of. I understand being able to adjust your suspension, but I would almost like to see it hidden rather than out there on the high side of the bike. So aesthetically, it wasn't very pleasing to me. It's more of a thing where you kind of find where you want to be on your suspension, you set it, and you kind of forget it, and you don't really touch it again. So I would be okay if it was under the seat rather than having that big knob out there, but I love having that side cover back and having that full clean look, especially on the high side of the bike. It makes the bike look so much more streamlined. That was one thing that people would always ask about, is it would really catch your eye. You could notice that people would walk by the bike and they'd say, hey, what is that thing right there?
So between the lighting, the upgraded motor, the ride modes, you now have a full suite of electronic intervention safety measures in this bike as well. Past model years, they've referred to it as RDRS, Reflex Defensive Rider System. You get that with the 6-axis IMU that it's in now in all of the Softails. Having that super nice as well. We didn't get in any situations today where we had to use it, where I had to lock up the bike or where I was spinning the throttle too hard through a turn where we needed to use traction control or anything. It is nice to have those electronic safety intervention tools on this bike. Overall, guys, the Breakout, I don't think it's changed in terms of who this bike's going to appeal to and who this bike is for. Probably not the guy that's going to Sturgis from California, right? Probably the guy that just wants to open his garage, pull an awesome bike right out of the garage that already looks like it's customized, and rip around the town. You got plenty of power, you got an awesome profile and attitude with this tire. I mean, the bike is just turnkey, ready to rip right out of the garage. I think this style of fat tire chopper will never really go out of style, and one of those styles is always going to be synonymous with Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Back in the early 2000s, when this was really, really hot and this style was really hot, a lot of people were taking bikes and building this style, and to get this style with the right geometry and ergonomics and all the engineering to make it handle properly right from the factory is a nice package to get. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If we were able to help you out, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for our future content. If you're looking for a Harley-Davidson in Southern California, make sure you check us out here at Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson, where we have no added dealer markup, no games. We get you in and out real quickly. It doesn't take 5 hours to buy a bike from us. See you guys in the next one. Later. First impressions getting off the Breakout, riding them back to back, Mickey, 25 and 24.
Yeah, I think what I like about it is that it's still a Breakout. You know, like I like that it's still a Breakout. I think it's what's weird that I didn't realize until I rode it, which I didn't realize I would think this, is that I don't like the way the gauge looks when I'm looking at the bike. The new gauge, you know, like when I'm walking up to it, I'm like, oh, why is there a cup holder right in the middle of the risers? But when you're on the bike, I prefer the data that's on there. Like I like the way it looks, and I don't know, maybe it's just a little bit more natural to me, because I've never really owned a smaller digital gauge like that, so I prefer this gauge as the rider. I also prefer the look of that air cleaner on the 24, but I like the 25 better because my leg doesn't hit it. So on the 24, my leg hits it, but I think aesthetically it's more pleasing. Yeah. But suspension, for sure, yeah, you can really notice a difference, especially on the freeway. And I don't know if you noticed this, but like even the throttle mechanism just feels smoother than my bike that I rode today, and that bike. Not only is the throttle more responsive, but I feel like there's zero grain when you turn it. Like it's very, very almost slippery, almost sensitive. In all the modes, like it feels like the actual whatever's on there, the throttle tube is just very, very smooth, and there's no drag on it whatsoever. I was messing around with the gauges a lot. I think I like where the new cruise control is, but other than that, it feels like the same bike, doesn't it?
Like Mickey said, it's still very much a Breakout. So the way it handles and everything with that big 21-inch wheel in the front, the 240 millimeter rear tire back there, it feels like you're on a big muscly drag bike still, and it handles as such. And you know, a lot of times people overblow the way that it handles to the negative side, but really these bikes, they handle great. You know, they're not as nimble as like a Lowrider S or something like that, but once you get used to it, they handle great and they look amazing. I mean, you're getting a little bit of a trade-off for a big aesthetic, you know, muscly, big fat rear tire back there, so it's definitely worth the trade-off. But overall, yeah, I think Harley-Davidson has incrementally improved a lot of little things. You know, more power, the flexibility, and to be able to tailor the ride modes, and just the suspension. The suspension feels good. I'm not necessarily going to say that it feels a lot better. I think from the short ride I did, I think the little stuff feels, you can feel it a little bit more on this straight rate spring on the 25. So like the 24 absorbs the little stuff better, but the big stuff, I feel like the 25s do better. That's kind of where you want it, you know, because that's where, you know, the big stuff where you hit the big joints and the big bumps in the road, that's where you want the suspension to do its magic the most. And I feel like the 25 does that a little bit better. But a good first ride, and I think, like I said, Harley-Davidson made a lot of nice little improvements on the Breakout overall.